Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, we have a crisis at our southern border that has captured the attention of the American people, but has fallen on deaf ears among my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and much more importantly, the President and the administration at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Just yesterday, I received a text from multiple law enforcement officers along the southern border, whether it's with the Department of Public Safety from Texas, whether it's with Border Patrol. For example, this was a quote, as of last night, the radios went crazy for West and South Laredo. Waves of folks, literally just group after group, bum rushing the border. The agents were spread thin as hell. In my precinct, we're literally all doubled up because our units are breaking down every other day. Ranchers are calling every other day stating there are folks on their property, but we can't get there fast enough. I hate to say this, but we're getting our rear ends handed to us. I used to have patterns, trends, and knew the drop-off pickup areas, but now it's a expletive free-for-all. Approximately 600 bodies at the Lavarios Gate, just half a mile east from Yarborough, happening right now in El Paso. I've got hundreds of these texts right now flooding into my phone, like every other member of Congress, because what is happening is an abject failure at the border, and it is a humanitarian crisis for Americans and for migrants. 5 million have been encountered at the southern border. 2 million have been released into the United States, incentivizing more to come. Over 1.5 million have evaded apprehension, i.e. gotaways, evading detection from Border Patrol since the beginning of this administration. Fentanyl pouring into our communities. Border Patrol has seized over 35,000 pounds of fentanyl. Just last Thursday morning, I met with 3 fentanyl moms, one of dozens of moms that I've met with because their children have died from fentanyl. 8 children in the school district in the county in which I reside, southwest of Austin, have died of fentanyl poisoning since last August. Over 10 have had to be resuscitated, revived with Narcan. Just last summer, 53 migrants effectively cooked in a tractor trailer in the hot Texas heat in San Antonio, Texas. 856 dead migrants, bodies found along the Rio Grande and in South Texas and on ranches. Little girls sold into the sex trafficking trade, held in stash houses in Laredo and Brownsville and El Paso and San Antonio and Houston and throughout this country. We know this to be true. It is documented to be true. And now the administration can't even keep up with the children that we have, with 85,000, according to the New York Times, not able to be contacted. And then my colleagues just blithely wipe that away, saying, oh, that's not true. It was a phone call. They didn't get them. They must be with a family member. What member of this body would treat their child that way? Oh, I called and didn't get a hold of them. Oh, well. But we do that with 85,000 children? I guess that's not nearly as effective as a photo op in white pantsuits sitting next to kids in cages, alleged, despite those cages were created by the previous administration specifically for the protection of children. But oh no, it doesn't look as good to have a photo op when you've got 85,000 missing children. And tomorrow, Title 42 expires. Now, for the average American, Title 42 is just something, they don't know what that is. What it is a part of our health code that allows us to say that we're going to turn people away in the middle of a pandemic. Yet the administration has been using that as effectively their only means of managing the border, to the extent you could call it managing the border. In March, for example, there were approximately 200,000 apprehensions. We're going to blow right through that right now because we're at 10, 11, 12,000 apprehensions a day. But when you add those 200,000 apprehensions, not even counting all of the parole, half of those were being turned away under Title 42. But when Title 42 expires tomorrow, more will come. There's an explosion at the border. None will be turned away because this administration has specifically chosen to ignore the law. And this administration is refusing to do their job to defend the border of the United States. The least compassionate, the least Christian, the least empathetic thing that a country could do is to allow human beings to be used as political pawns by cartels for profit, while Americans die by the thousands, while migrants get raped and abused and put in stash houses by cartels for profit by the thousands, while migrants die along the southern border by the hundreds, if not the thousands now, while our own people get overrun, their own ranches. I've sat and met with the ranch owners in South Texas who have to run across finding a dead body of a young woman, a mother with a baby on their ranch. Imagine, in the most powerful nation in the history of the world, thinking it's compassionate to have a system that allows that. But yet that is precisely what we do. Unfortunately, what my colleagues' response will be is, oh, we're going to have to do something about our immigration system and future flow and figuring out what we're going to do to make sure that we reform immigration. Don't you know, if we had comprehensive immigration reform, this would all just magically evaporate? Completely not true. The fact of the matter is, the starting point for any sensible border and immigration plan is a secure border in which you actually enforce the laws of the United States. Why? So people know what the rules are. We allow 600,000 to 1 million and 1.2 million, depending on the year, people to come into this country legally, as we should. Yes, we need to reform our immigration system, but none of it matters if we're going to embrace lawlessness and wide open borders and ignore the rule of law to the detriment of people and to the detriment of the very system that attracts people from around the world. We should be exporting the rule of law rather than importing lawlessness, fentanyl, death, and destruction. And the legislation we have before us would be a giant step towards ensuring that we can hold this administration accountable to make sure that we secure our border, protect our citizens, and protect migrants who seek to come here. And with that, I will reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding the customary 30 minutes. Mr. Speaker, it is now after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We were scheduled to be on the floor today around noon, but when I came to the floor prepared to debate this rule, we were told first to wait and then that the House would recess so that Republicans could go back behind closed doors to negotiate among themselves. This is becoming a pattern in this Congress. For the second session week in a row, the Rules Committee met far into the night and reported out completely closed rules that allowed no amendments on the floor. And now, after Speaker McCarthy realized that he couldn't pass his own bill, he spent all day negotiating in secret to twist people's arms to get enough votes from his own party to get this bill or the rule passed on the floor. No one has seen what's coming out of the backroom deal today and allegedly moving to the floor under this very rule. This isn't how you run the People's House, although it's apparently how the new House majority runs the People's House. Backroom deals that prioritize politics over policy or people. Turning to the matters at hand, this rule moves 2 bills to the floor. The first is H.R. 2, although, as mentioned, we still don't know what the final version of that bill will be. We should all be able to agree that immigration and border security present vast and complex issues. Despite my colleagues' pronouncements to the contrary, we all want a secure border that protects our national security. But we also need to address the realities of migration, the forces that are driving families, even young children, to flee their homes, and the serious workforce shortages confronting businesses in our country and elsewhere. Given the complexities of these issues, they require comprehensive and nuanced solutions. H.R. 2 is neither. It's a great example of the old adage, for every complex problem, there's a solution that is simple, clear, and wrong. During my legal career, I spent decades working on immigration cases and within our immigration system. I know it's underfunded and dysfunctional and has been for many, many years. We also know that American businesses, small and large, are asking for immigration reform so that they can hire the healthcare, agricultural, research, food service workers they need. Solving these issues is not simple, but I'm extremely disappointed that my Republican colleagues want to create more chaos by bringing an extremist, cruel, and completely unworkable bill to the floor today. The truth is, this isn't responsible or serious governance. And without any real proposal, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle resort to conspiracy theories, fact-free rhetoric, and political theater designed to stoke fear and chaos to distract from their lack of real solutions. We've seen how the failed and inhumane immigration policies of the prior administration weakened our economy, undermined our moral standing in the world, inflicted unimaginable cruelty upon defenseless migrant children, and did not make us any safer. However, Republican extremists want to take us back there again. Once more, they'd rather fixate and waste American taxpayer dollars to build a wall that the experts, including Customs and Border Patrol, agree will not solve the issue. And I must call out the dishonesty of claiming that families seeking legal asylum are a source of the very real scourge of fentanyl and other dangerous drug trafficking. We know from Customs and Border Patrol data that over 90% of fentanyl seizures occur at U.S. ports of entry, in trucks or cargo ships, not in areas that a border wall might cover. Despite this fact, the bill fails to provide needed resources at ports of entry to fight fentanyl smuggling, where it's actually happening. And just last month, House Republicans voted to cap non-defense discretionary funding, which, according to DHS, would result in the cutting of 2,400 Customs and Border Patrol officers and agents that do this work, fighting the scourge of fentanyl. How can we begin to craft measures to address either the fentanyl crisis or humanitarian issues at our border if our Republican colleagues insist on starting from a place of misplaced blame and misguided policies? Additionally, this bill, or at least the most recent version of it that we've seen, enacts a nationwide e-Verify system without providing other reforms that give meaningful pathways for undocumented workers to legalize their status, as employers across this country are screaming for. In doing so, this provision has the potential to wipe out half of our agricultural workforce, cause huge disruptions in our nation's food system, allow a mass offshoring of jobs, and sink American farms from California to Pennsylvania and throughout states across the nation. This isn't the first Congress in which Republicans have tried to move forward on this e-Verify proposal. And in every Congress, it faces opposition from the small business community, civil liberties groups, religious organizations, agricultural organizations and growers, privacy advocates, libertarian think tanks, and immigration reform groups, because it fails to address our broken immigration system in a meaningful way. And this time around is no different. H.R. 2 also bans the Department of Homeland Security funding for critical nonprofit and religious partners that provide shelter, food, legal assistance, and other aid to vulnerable immigrants. That means a faith-based NGO that helps an Afghan refugee to find housing or gives support to a woman here on a U visa, that's a special status set aside for victims of crimes, will no longer get assistance to do that important work. How can our Republican colleagues say this bill is only about border security when it clearly and cruelly rips resources away from those in the country legally, too? And when it comes to this bill, the immoral policies do not stop there. This legislation puts children in harm's way, the very ones the other side of the aisle claims they want to protect. Children come or are brought to the U.S. because the conditions in their home countries are so horrific, whether due to poverty, violence, corruption, or climate change, and how it's destroying their way of life. This is a situation that's been building for decades, and H.R. 2 does nothing to address it. During my legal career, I represented many of those children, those who were orphaned, those who were fleeing gang violence, starvation, or abuse. If we really want to protect child victims of trafficking or children separated from their parents who arrive at our border, we don't limit their access to representation as this bill does. We give them the tools to make the case that they're eligible to stay in this country, which a child simply cannot do unless they have a qualified attorney with them. I've seen up close how important representation is to anyone trying to navigate our immigration system, but especially kids. When our colleagues say they want to send unaccompanied children home to safety, they're turning a blind eye to reality. The reality that for most of these kids, there is no safe home. Their parents are dead or otherwise unavailable, and country conditions are so dangerous that the journey to our border is a safer alternative. This bill would expose children to the very harms and exploitation my Republican colleagues hollowly insist they want to prevent. In addition to limiting children's access to counsel, the bill allows them to be jailed. It guts the protections of the Flores Settlement Agreement, which has governed the conditions of children held in government custody for 26 years. In doing so, the bill upends a carefully crafted system to minimize the detention of children due to the grave impact that it has on their physical and mental health. The evidence is clear. No amount of detention is safe for kids. Even a short period can cause long-term harm, like psychological trauma and mental health risks. Despite knowing this, my Republican colleagues wrote a bill that allows the long-term detention of minors who arrive in the U.S. and that jails kids and their families indefinitely. I want to describe for a moment a tragic situation this bill creates. A mother and her child fleeing violence or starvation at home come to America in search of safety and legal asylum. When she finds the ports of entry are closed, which this bill would do, that mother takes her child and crosses between them. She then follows the rules and applies for asylum. To be clear, she's not a risk for flight or violence. Even so, this bill requires that she and her young child could be jailed for what could be years if she's prosecuted for the misdemeanor of unlawful entry, a result that's prohibited by current law and the Flores litigation. And this legislation falsely states it's consistent with the Flores decision, although it's clear that it's not, and that the court has already ruled on that precise point. If my colleagues want to come together and meaningfully work on immigration reform, it can't start from a place of cruelty against the most vulnerable. Instead, we need to recognize both the horrific conditions that cause migrants to flee their homes and the meaningful contributions that immigrants make to our country. And critically, we must provide functioning pathways for people to enter the U.S. lawfully. The second bill here is H.R. 1163. So in addition to their misguided immigration plan, today House Republicans are bringing up a harmful bill that hinders anti-fraud programs, opens up new pathways to fraud in unemployment insurance programs, and opens workers up to surprise bills through no fault of their own. My colleagues want to attack unemployment insurance, a benefit that helped millions of Americans stay afloat during the depths of the pandemic. Of course, it's important that we prevent fraud in our public programs, and instances of fraud in unemployment insurance absolutely should be addressed and prosecuted. In fact, just this morning, we learned that a Republican member of this chamber was indicted in New York on charges that, among other things, he allegedly stole public funds by fraudulently collecting pandemic unemployment benefits. I hope all my colleagues agree that stealing public funds, especially during a global pandemic when so many working people lost their jobs and needed the support to keep their families healthy and fed, is unacceptable and absolutely should disqualify someone from serving in the United States Congress. However, although my colleagues across the aisle claim that they want to fight fraud in unemployment insurance, their leadership continues to welcome the votes of this alleged fraudster in order to push a deeply unpopular and extremist agenda. And they want to pass a bill that makes it harder to catch the kind of cross-state fraud that their colleague has allegedly committed by slashing $400 million in critical funding for Department of Labor anti-fraud programs. It opens up opportunities for fraud in UI programs by halting the rollout of new identification verification systems. And the legislation allows states to send surprise bills to workers for accidental overpayments of unemployment insurance benefits made during the pandemic. These overpayments were made to workers who did nothing wrong and did not know they had been overpaid. These people spent their unemployment insurance on necessities like food for themselves and their children. They returned to work as soon as they could. But now, Republicans with this bill want to send these working people a bill and punish them for an error that they didn't commit. Ultimately, both of these proposals from my Republican colleagues are unserious, and unworkable. They'll wreak harm on America's economy, especially businesses unable to find workers to grow or even survive. They'll wreak harm on working families, law-abiding immigrants, and terrified refugees who have the right to seek asylum at our borders. These bills are political stunts to stir up extremist supporters, not serious solutions to complex problems, problems that require comprehensive and nuanced solutions. We're eager to work with responsible legislators from any party on an immigration bill that truly secures the border, protects dreamers, and solves the workforce challenges we're seeing from farms to pharmacies. Such a bill would grow our economy, help our communities combat crime, and stem the flow of illegal drugs into our country. We firmly believe that we can reach an agreement that secures our border and reforms our immigration system in a way that reflects fundamental American values, and we're ready to work on that now. We welcome assistance in that from the House majority. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a couple of points. First of all, this tired talking point of 90% of narcotics being captured at the ports of entry. Well, of course, that's the only place where we have Border Patrol because they're overwhelmed doing processing. We don't have anybody patrolling the border between the ports of entry. So, of course, you're collecting and finding a higher percentage of narcotics at the ports of entry. And a second point, this idea that this is treating kids inhumanely. Let's be very clear that what we do in this policy is treat children from other countries exactly as we treat them from Mexico and Canada under current law. And importantly, President Obama, that radical MAGA extremist, President Barack Obama, asked for this fix in his bill. I yield to my friend from Texas.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise today in support of the rule in the underlying bill, H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act of 2023. For over 2 years, this administration, the Biden administration, has continued to ignore crisis after crisis. Just 2 weeks ago, the American people saw that President Biden and the Democrat Party were just fine ignoring a looming debt crisis. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, House Republicans kept their promise. They kept their promise to the American people and passed a responsible solution to raising the country's debt ceiling. Now this week, House Republicans are having to once again clean up after this administration and their reckless policies that are hurting the lives of Americans around the country, but especially in our home state of Texas. Our southern border is not secure. This administration does not have operational control, and their claim that they have decreased illegal immigration by 90% is simply laughable. President Biden's destructive policies and continued lies to the American people have only worsened this deepening crisis. We've heard from members, we've heard from law enforcement on the ground that this country has gone from one of the safest and most secure borders under the Trump administration to an unsustainable humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, and it is getting worse by the hour. And with the expiration of Title 42 tomorrow, it will be unfathomable of what will be facing our friends on the Texas border. This all happened within the first 24 hours of this administration. President Biden sits in the White House and threatens to veto our bill, calling for comprehensive immigration reform. While vulnerable migrants are crossing our southern border, they're killed, they're trafficked every single day. Along with other Republican members, I want to see comprehensive immigration reform, but that cannot be done until this crisis on our southern border is under control, and H.R. 2 will do exactly that. Mr. Speaker, this bill will finish the border wall. It will provide adequate funding for our Border Patrol agents and ensure that the migrants most vulnerable, the unaccompanied alien children, are taken care of once they become this country's responsibility. This bill is just common sense. I urge members to support the underlying bill, support the rule, and yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the President. Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you. I do find it a little hard to credit the expressions of concern for the migrants who are crossing our border when, yet again today, the governor of Texas sent a busload of migrants from the border after announcing he was providing free transportation to them, but he refuses to tell the cities where they are headed that the migrants are on the way. So, as has occurred multiple times over the last year, people were dumped in Philadelphia at 6 o'clock in the morning. Thank God that the weather has turned, because when they were dumping them on New Year's Eve, it was pretty darn cold. So, please spare me the crocodile tears for the humanitarian concerns when you're not willing to help ease that process. Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from New Mexico, a very distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Leger-Fernandez.
Gentlewoman from New Mexico is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I've been at the border. I've seen the sadness and faint hope, the faces of the children seeking asylum. Imagine the desperation a mother must feel sending her child across a treacherous path to seek asylum in the United States. It reminds me of another refugee, a mother who knew that if she did not send her child away, he would surely be killed. She placed her baby in a raft and sent him across the river. It was the Nile River. The baby was Moses. The bill we are taking up today would take away important asylum paths for children. I call upon my colleagues to remember the story of Moses, to remember the humanity that must be a guiding principle to the United States asylum laws. Our immigration system is surely broken. H.R. 2, though, does not fix it. Republicans instead are creating more chaos. Republicans are creating more chaos at the border. Chaos, not humanity, appears to be their guiding principle. This bill destroys the asylum seekers, wrecks our agricultural economy, and fails to address the flow of fentanyl into our communities. H.R. 2 even punishes those heroic nonprofits who serve to seek the vulnerable asylum seekers. At Rules early this morning, I presented amendments for members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that would increase security, keep fentanyl and other deadly drugs off our streets, and protect military families. Republicans voted against funding our fight against fentanyl. They refused any amendments to be heard on the floor today that we would have discussed last night. We do not have enough farm workers to harvest our crops, or in New Mexico to grow our world-renowned green chili. The provisions in this bill are bad for farmers, ranchers, and for our agricultural economy. Instead of destroying our agricultural economy, let's pass the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. Instead of denying our students what they need, let's pass the American Dream and Promise Act. These bipartisan bills would grow our economy. Let's work together to fix our immigration system. I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to address, at least for a minute, this disparaging commentary about the governor of Texas busing migrants. Well, I guess my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would like to ignore the fact that the Democratic mayor of El Paso is teaming up with Governor Abbott to do that. The Democrat mayor of El Paso was teaming up with the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, to do just that. Because, walk a mile in our shoes in the state of Texas while we have hundreds of thousands of people pouring into our communities throughout the state of Texas. Welcome to the party. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina.
Gentleman from South Carolina is yielded 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Hearing my friends on the other aisle talk, we're really on two different universes. We live in two different universes. The invasion that's happening at the border has not happened to this country nor any other country that has survived. And for you to make the claim of compassion, where's the compassion for the rapes that are occurring along the border? Where's your compassion for the farmers? It took your vice president, I don't think she's been to the border. It took the president I don't think he's been to the border where the crossings were really occurring. He went for a photo op. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a crisis that no country that's ever had this type of invasion has been able to survive. America is at a crossroads, and this administration is guilty of opening up the borders. There is no point of entry. That's why where most of the illegals are coming that they can't track. And as my good friend from Texas, Congressman Roy, said last night at an 8-hour rules meeting, the fact is you don't want border security. You want everybody from every country to come into America. It's not fair for the police. It's not fair for our farmers. What about our schools that are being flooded? What about our Salvation Armies that are being flooded, will be flooded? What about our hospitals? Anybody and everybody coming into this country, it's not right. Let's look at some of the figures. And by the way, this is the strongest immigration bill that has ever been put forward. Just over last weekend, there were 26,000 apprehensions, over 7,000 gotaways, over 164 pounds of marijuana, 84 pounds of cocaine, 11 pounds of fentanyl, and 3 sex offenders. And this is just what was caught, what was missed. We're on track to have over 6 to 10 million illegals in this country that are taking advantage of our citizens, taking advantage of our police force, taking advantage of those who have lived in this country, and at least have get the wall built, which this bill does, at least have some type knowledge of who is coming. I've been to the border, and it's a sad sight to see. I've seen what's happening when they load the buses and distribute people all over the country. What about those who have done it legally? Last August, Biden formally ended President Trump's successful Remain in Mexico program. And within Biden's first 100 days in office, he took 94 executive actions on immigration.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Yield the gentleman 15 more seconds.
I'll just end up to say that this is un-American. It's not fair. I don't know how we walk this back, but it's something that this bill will protect and will help this country and will stop what this president is implementing. Thank you so much.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Members on both sides are reminded to direct your comments to the chair. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you. I just have to push back a little bit on this idea that somehow immigrants coming to this country are taking advantage of our police and different parts of our society. I mean, the Cato Institute, of all places, has published recently a study that shows there's a net economic benefit for several generations when we have immigrants come to this country. And of course, there's also the continuing inaccurate characterization of these folks coming here illegally when they are applying for asylum. So at this point, Mr. Speaker, I would yield 3.5 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Rules, Mr. McGovern.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 3.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, we are about to debate H.R. 2, a horrible immigration bill that betrays our values, that hurts our farmers, that makes it easier to put fentanyl on our streets. And we're told it was rewritten in a back room in the Speaker's office. I have yet to see the rewrite. In fact, I haven't even heard a description of what was changed. And I want to say for the record, from a process standpoint, this is as bad as it gets. My friends should be ashamed of themselves. But wait, there's even more. I wasn't planning to speak today, but I have to point out the ridiculous hypocrisy of what's going on. Republicans are here on the floor with straight faces, acting like unemployment insurance fraud is one of the top problems in America. They ignore billionaires who pay no taxes, but they want us to believe there's an unemployment insurance crime spree. And so here we are. They're going after farmers and veterans, after workers and families that needed help during the pandemic, while at the same time a sitting member of the House Republican Conference was indicted in federal court this morning for unemployment fraud. Let me repeat that. We have a member of this body, a member of this Republican conference, a key swing vote on their debt ceiling bill, a key swing vote to secure Kevin McCarthy's speakership, who this morning was in federal custody for, let me quote this from the indictment, falsely claiming to be unemployed while he was making $120,000 a year. I mean, is this a joke? George Santos allegedly stole almost $25,000 in unemployment benefits. And here's the part that you can't make up. This is too absurd to be true, but it is. Their bill defunds the program that catches people who commit this kind of fraud. I have a letter in front of me from the Department of Labor, which I will insert into the record, that says their bill defunds the program that helps them catch fraud. Now, maybe that's why George Santos co-sponsored it. Of course he did. If this becomes law, maybe he would have gotten away with it. But I think we should rename this the George Anthony DeValder Santos Fraudster Protection Act. What's that old horror movie saying? The call is coming from inside the House. You're going after fraud, but the fraud is coming from inside the Republican conference. Deal with that. And here's the bottom line. The modern GOP has become the party of corruption and crime. It's all about power for them. They put their own power above the people we represent. Their front runner for president is a sexual abuser and has been indicted for his illegal hush money payments to cover up his affair. They won't denounce it. Their key swing vote was in federal custody for allegedly stealing unemployment benefits and lying to Congress, and they won't kick him out. They want to gut the Office of Congressional Ethics, and they want to make it easier for rich people to cheat on their taxes. And now they want to pass a bill that would make it easier for George Santos to get away with fraud. Forget honor, forget principles, forget integrity. All they care about is power at any cost. It is disgraceful, it is shameful, it is wrong, and I urge a no vote on this rule and the underlying bill.
Time has expired. Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair.
That's my thing.
Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania reserves. You're recognized.
Mr. McGovern raised a few good points, but one in particular, we haven't seen the bill that we're allegedly supposed to be considering with this rule. Last night, Mr. Norman, who just spoke, correctly criticized this closed process. He said, and I quote, "That's a problem going forward, a huge problem, because that's not the process we think is fair to everyone," end quote. I would simply say to the gentleman that the process has only gotten worse. Reportedly, there will be an amendment offered to this rule that we haven't even seen yet. Although I guess the fact we may now know why we had to delay the hearing until this point so that your members could return from New York. But I wonder when we're going to see the open and transparent process that some of our Rules Committee colleagues have spoken so much about. And with that, I would reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Yeah, I would just remind my colleagues that it was in December when we got a $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill that was 4,000 pages long around 1 a.m. and then voted on it the next day. And in that bill, there was specific language that prohibited the Department of Homeland Security from actually, securing the homeland by securing the border. I would yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Missouri.
Gentleman from Missouri is yielded 2 minutes.
Thank you to my good friend from Texas. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to express my strong support for the rules package of H.R. 2, Secure the Border Act. 1 year ago today, I was on the border with Mexico to see firsthand the deadly, chaotic crisis that this administration has created. With a wink and a nod, this president has welcomed more than 6 million illegal aliens into our sovereign nation, a human trafficking nightmare with some 85,000 children unaccounted for tonight. More than 100,000 of our fellow citizens murdered from fentanyl, drugs manufactured in communist China and smuggled across our southern border. An open border that is open business for the Mexican cartels that are now operating on our side of the border. And all we hear from this administration is lies. Lies that their immigration policy is based on compassion. It is exploitation, not compassion. Lies that the border is not open and that it's secure. Lies that the Border Patrol uses whips on illegals. Look, I've been on a horse. I know the difference between a whip and a rein. And just this past Monday, the White House came out with the biggest lie of all, that illegal immigration is down more than 90% under Biden. At this very moment, there are more than 1 million people amassed near our southern border, ready for Title 42 to expire and stream across our border largely unchecked. This administration's solution is to send 1,500 troops, not to push them back, but to push pencils. If this president and his Secretary of Homeland Security cannot find the grit to secure the border, we must do it in this chamber. Ronald Reagan once said, "A nation that cannot control its border is not a nation." Today, like Colonel William Barrett Travis, we draw the line in the sand. We will not lose our nation. We will not surrender to the drug cartels. We will not surrender to the lies of this administration, and we will not surrender America. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, and I apologize to my colleagues across the aisle. I didn't realize that I needed to delay my remarks until the next round. I do seek unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter from the Department of Labor which states that H.R. 1163 would hinder efforts to tackle unemployment insurance fraud, delay payments, and undermine state efforts to modernize and protect the system from fraud.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Mississippi, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Homeland Security, Mr. Thompson.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentlelady from Pennsylvania. I rise today in opposition to the closed rule and the underlying bill. H.R. 2, the Child Deportation Act, was developed in an extreme mega echo chamber. Homeland Security Committee Republicans defeated all 43 amendments offered by Democrats to fix the bill's many flaws. This closed rule goes a step further and blocks House consideration of amendments like the one I filed, adding 1,700 CBP officers at ports of entry to process migrants, facilitate trade and tourism, and interdict fentanyl. More than 90%, as you've already heard, of hard drugs are interdicted at ports of entry. This is information passed to us by CBP, but Republicans refuse to make investments in the many ports of entry workforce or technology. Worst yet, the bill does nothing to address cartels and fentanyl trafficking. The rules doubles down on Donald Trump's border wall by blocking consideration of an amendment filed by Representative Troy Carter to protect landowners from eminent domain. With new border wall segments likely to cost about $46 million per mile, building 900 miles of walls could total billions. Finally, this closed rule blocks consideration of Representative Robert Garcia's amendment to strike language that villainizes community and religious organizations which provide basic necessities to migrants. H.R. 2 is written so poorly that it could force the American Red Cross to verify each person's immigration status before offering help. Can you imagine if groups have to say, "Show us your papers"? That's just cruel. I urge a no vote on the rule and the underlying bill and yield back.
Fired. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Honored to yield 2 minutes to my friend from Virginia.
Gentleman from Virginia yielded 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my friend from Texas for your leadership on this initiative and on this bill. It is sad that we find ourselves today having to force the administration to enforce the security of the United States border, that we have to force the Department of Homeland Security to secure the border. What this bill will do is to codify into law the effective policies under the previous administration that left this president with a secure border. What did this president have to do to maintain a secure border? Nothing but keep the policies in place that he inherited. We are currently averaging some 10,000 illegals per day invading the country. And what is the response from the Democrats on the other side in this administration? We can do better. We're having some 300,000 illegals invade the country on a monthly basis. Think the 3 largest football stadiums in the country, that equivalency, invading our border every day, invading our country. And yet we cannot get one Democrat vote, I predict, to vote to secure our border, to protect our country's national security, our health security, our economic security. This bill will build the wall. It will hire more border agents. It will enhance technology to assist them. It will require transparency and accountability from this derelict Department of Homeland Security. It will enhance compensation for our Border Patrol. It will support local law enforcement in their efforts to help secure the border. The fact is, no country in the history of the world has been more welcoming to migrants from all over the world, from all races, all nationalities, all ethnicities than the United States of America. We support legal, lawful immigration, and that's why this country permits a million legal migrants every year. But we must stand united against illegal immigration, and this bill does just that. And I yield back to the gentleman from Texas.
Sir, the gentleman from Texas reserves, the gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I'll offer an amendment to the rule to provide for consideration of a resolution which states that it's the House's responsibility to protect and preserve Social Security and Medicare for our future generations and reject any cuts to these essential programs. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment into the record, along with any extraneous material, immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
So ordered.
Mr. Speaker, Social Security
Without
and Medicare...
objection.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker, Social Security and Medicare are vital to many of our constituents' economic and health security. Many of my Republican friends across the aisle were calling for major cuts to these critical programs, but recently some have changed their tune. If they truly believe in their new position, I'm offering my friends the opportunity to back it up with a vote in the People's House. This vote will give members the opportunity to reassure Americans that the House won't eviscerate these foundational programs that our constituents rely upon. To discuss our proposal, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner.
The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Americans are counting on us to pass real comprehensive immigration reform, but the bill being put forward by our Republican colleagues is a cruel and counterproductive measure that will only make our immigration problems worse by restricting legal immigration, criminalizing nonprofit organizations, putting children's lives at risk, and increasing the workload of Border Patrol officers without the support they need to do their jobs. So let's send this flawed bill back to committee for further work and instead pass HRES 178 to declare our sense that we are committed to protecting Social Security and Medicare. During the President's State of the Union address, the American people saw in real time as President Biden shamed our Republican colleagues into backing off their plans to cut Social Security and Medicare for now. But we know that there are many in their caucus that are still scheming to cut these essential programs. Last year, Democrats and President Biden passed a measure to allow Medicare to negotiate with the drug companies to lower drug prices. We should expand this program. Social Security and Medicare are vital lifelines. We must protect them, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This crisis has taken an unimaginable toll on the state of Texas, my home state, and the citizens there, as well as the migrants seeking to come into this country. I get contacted every single day, like my colleagues from Texas. In 2022, more than 2,000 Texans died from fentanyl poisoning, a 500% increase from 2019. I've already talked about the 53 migrants killed in a tractor trailer in the Texas heat. Texas has been forced to deal with it on their own, spending $4 billion of their own budget, $3 billion last cycle, because we're having to deal with the job the federal government is supposed to do. El Paso, state of emergency. Laredo, a state of emergency. Brownsville, a state of emergency. San Antonio, beefing up to try to deal with the surge. We're dealing with it every single day in Texas. And for that reason, I'm going to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I rise in support of this bill. President Biden's policies have caused a massive surge of 370,000 unaccompanied children to come to our southwest border since he took office. Where's the outrage? Where are the tears? According to an HHS whistleblower, the U.S. government has become a middleman in a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar child trafficking operation run by bad actors seeking to profit off the lives of children. Where's the outrage? Where are the tears? We have seen from members on the other side of the aisle that they are claiming that this bill is going to somehow hurt children. Where are they reading the reports of minors as young as 9 who are being brought over illegally and are working the midnight shift, the graveyard shift in meatpacking plants? Again, where is the tears? Where is the outrage? H.R. 2 stops future surges and protects children by treating unaccompanied children from Mexico and the rest of the world in the same manner, enabling their safe return home to their families after they are screened for indications of trafficking or a credible fear of persecution. Look, when I was mayor of a city, I was city council for 6 years, I was mayor for 6 years, of a city of about 250,000 people, I saw the cost of illegal immigration firsthand at the local level. I saw the toll that it put on our local cities and communities in housing, in schools, in crime, in resources. I was lucky enough to be able to partner with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and we saw at that time more illegal criminal aliens that were deported from our city per capita than any other city in the country. What did we see from that? Our crime dropped, and people who lived in low-income areas, minority areas, were the ones who benefited the most because they were being targeted by that crime. The American people did not vote for this chaos. They voted to have control over our borders. What we have seen from this administration is they continue to take every single tool out of the toolbox that is able to actually secure our borders. The American people sent us to D.C. to secure our borders and put an end to the worst humanitarian crisis our nation has ever seen. It's absurd that we're even here today having to pass a bill to force this administration to enforce the laws and do its most basic job, which is to enforce our laws, secure our border, and protect our nation. I yield
time
back.
has expired. The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from
Reserve.
Texas reserves. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
The gentleman is recognized for
Thank
2
you,
minutes.
Madam and Mr. Speaker. And to my colleague from Texas, I want to say that this bill, this set of bills, criminalizes California's, the United States private sector. Why do you make small businesses, large businesses, criminals? We have a 3.6 unemployment rate in this country. Every time I have businesses in my office, they say, we need workers, we need more immigrants. This is not what this set of bills is doing. Let's start out by recognizing the reality that we are living in the greatest country in the world, the strongest economy in the world. We need workers, and these bills fail to recognize that reality. Let's go back and work across the aisle. I say to my colleagues on the other side, let's come up with comprehensive immigration reform and a way to keep America as the greatest economy in the world. These bills do not do that. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from Texas recognized.
I'd yield 2 minutes to my friend from Oklahoma.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank my friend from Texas. Title 42 expires tomorrow, and as Republicans are advancing the most conservative border bill ever, this administration is going to usher in more chaos on the southern border. It's going to be quite the contrast for the American people to witness. Border Patrol agents are already seeing a surge, 26,000 illegals apprehended in a 72-hour period. This is on top of 5 million illegal immigrants that have come into this nation within a 2-year period. That's more than the entire population of the state of Oklahoma, the state which I'm a representative of. House Republicans have a plan, and it's the bill before us, the Secure Border Act of 2023, which would resume wall construction. And that includes the 200-plus miles of wall that was fully funded by Congress but shut down when President Biden, in contrast to what the Constitution says, with his pen said, not another foot. This bill is going to deploy more technology. It's going to increase Border Patrol agents. It's going to end catch and release. Notice to appear in front of a judge has become notice to disappear under this administration. Securing the border used to be a bipartisan issue. In fact, President Biden supported the Secure Fence Act of 2006 when he was a United States Senator. That bill included physical barriers, a 150-mile of wall built under the Obama administration. Here is what then Senator Biden, in his own words, said: "Why I believe the fence is needed does not have anything to do with immigration as much as drugs. And let me tell you something, folks. People are driving across that border with tons, hear me, tons of everything, from byproducts, from meth to cocaine to heroin. It's coming up from corrupt Mexico." That was then Senator Biden. This statement is long before the fentanyl crisis, where 70,000 people in the United States died last year because of fentanyl poisoning, the leading cause of death between ages 18 and 45. And the Biden's own patrol agent disagrees with this administration.
Reserve.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you. Is my colleague prepared to close?
Mr. Speaker, I'm ready to offer an amendment.
It's not a trick question.
Ready to offer an amendment.
Okay. Then I reserve. No? Close.
Does the gentlelady reserve?
No, I would close now.
Okay. The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. Since the aftermath of World War II, the United States has championed its duty to uphold the international right to seek asylum by providing those fleeing persecution with safe haven here in America. However, the Republican immigration plan in H.R. 2 and the rhetoric we've heard about it today does nothing more than sow chaos, anger, and fear about this important humanitarian system. And it puts the blame for our broken immigration system on the backs of families and children fleeing poverty and violence, instead of recognizing the complexity of the issues involving immigration and border security and blaming Congress for failing to address our broken system for decades. It's clear that jailing families indefinitely or sending unaccompanied children back to dangerous and exploitative situations and refusing to provide working legal pathways to residence will not make us any safer. Neither will wasting American taxpayer dollars to build a discredited and ineffective border wall, decimating our agricultural sector, or defunding trusted nonprofit organizations that provide support to immigrants. These are not the comprehensive multi-pronged solutions we need, the kind of solutions that Democrats have been imploring our Republican colleagues to come to the table on, solutions that secure our ports of entry, expand legal pathways, and address the root causes of migration. A long and impactful history of immigration is at the heart of our American story, and as such, we should meaningfully fix our immigration system so it works better and can continue making our country stronger. We shouldn't gut it or attempt to destroy it altogether. I want a better future than that for the United States and all those who call it home. Mr. Speaker, I urge our colleagues to oppose the previous question in the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, what we offer today through this rule will be legislation that will strengthen our southern border, secure this country, protect Americans, protect migrants, and ensure that our communities can be safe, particularly along our southern border in states like Texas, where the Speaker and I and many of our colleagues reside, and other friends of ours in Arizona, New Mexico, California that are dealing with this every single day. This bill is pretty simple. It strengthens and requires the administration to enforce existing law and closes the asylum and detention loopholes that have been exploited for years. It curbs releases into the interior, a massive pull factor, by requiring DHS to detain, remove, or place in a safe third country, but in doing so allows a path for migrants to be able to pursue asylum claims, but just simply follows current law to not be released into the United States. Again, it's pretty straightforward. It re-implements the asylum deals that were working and ends the bogus asylum claims. It keeps families together while asylum claims are being processed. It protects unaccompanied children by reforming TVPRA, a request from the Obama administration. It requires DHS to immediately resume border wall construction, which President Biden has halted. The fact is, the American people are very well aware of the crisis at the border that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem to ignore. I had some friends send me while I was speaking here the comment section from the New York Times. The comment section from the New York Times. I'm not talking about Breitbart or something. I'm talking about the New York Times. Page after page after page of citizens saying, for example, though I've always voted Democrat, my vote in the next presidential election will go to whichever candidate has the best, most seemingly effective plan for securing our border. It's the most pressing issue for our country. If only the president and my Democratic colleagues would agree. The fact of the matter is, we have a devastating crisis that is killing Americans and killing migrants. And right now, to be very clear, our Border Patrol agents and our law enforcement community along the southern border are overwhelmed. They are crying out for help. I had a man text me just a minute ago who works with Border Patrol and DPS who said we're at a broken arrow moment. We are overrun. We have no place to go. We have a crisis. This body needs to respond, and we need to take action as we speak. Mr. Speaker, shortly I will be offering an amendment to the rule. The amendment is a very short one-page modification that makes clear that Congress will address within 60 days the dangerous cartels confronting our country. And it will add a sense of Congress to clarify certain language involving agricultural issues related to E-Verify. Mr. Speaker, I offer an amendment to the resolution.
Report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Roy of Texas. Strike the first section of the resolving clause and insert the following. That upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 2, to secure the borders of the United States and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The amendment specified in Section 3 of this resolution shall be considered as adopted. The bill, as amended, shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill, as amended, are waived. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill, as amended, and on any further amendment thereto, to final passage without intervening motion except one. 5 hours of debate, with 2 hours equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Homeland Security or their respective designees. 2 hours equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. And 1 hour equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs or their respective designees. And 2, 1 motion to recommit. Add at the end the following. Section 3, the amendment referred to in the first section of this resolution is as follows. Amend Section 123 of Division A to read as follows. Section 123, report on Mexican drug cartels. Not later than 60 days after the date of the enactment of this act, Congress shall commission a report that contains the following. 1, a national strategy to address Mexican drug cartels and a determination regarding whether there should be a designation established to address such cartels. 2, information related to actions by such cartels that causes harm to the United States. In Title 8 of Division B, redesignate Section 815 as Section 816. In Title 8 of Division B, insert after Section 814 the following. Section 815, Sense of Congress on further implementation. It is the sense of Congress that in implementing the E-Verify program, the Secretary of Homeland Security shall ensure any adverse impact on the nation's agricultural workforce, operations, and food security are considered and addressed.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the amendment and on